All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Better Body Radio. And today I am joined by Richie Kirwan. How are you doing, Richie?
I am doing grand, Ross. How are you?
Very good, very good. Very excited to have you on. So before we dive into the topic today, I just want to give the guys a little bit of an intro to you. So Richie is a PhD researcher focused on the areas of diet, exercise, sarcopenia, which we're going to be talking about today, and heart disease. He's also an active online coach and owner of Be More Nutrition, with the ultimate goal of helping his clients to be more for the rest of their lives. Richie is a strong believer in making food delicious for his clients and allowing them to enjoy every bite, avoiding these overly restricted diets within the industry that are rife. And as if his PhD, research and coaching wasn't enough, which funny enough, when we were just talking off air before that, it clearly is quite a lot on your plate. You also run an awesome podcast, evidence-based podcast called The Health Scientist, which includes regular interviews with amazing guests spanning from researchers, doctors, and fellow coaches. I brought Richie on today to talk about the fascinating topic of sarcopenia, which I know everyone listening will take plenty away from. Richie, welcome to Better Body Radio.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Brilliant. So we'll literally dive straight in, and I always like to ask a similar type of first question, just so the listeners can get to know you a little bit more and understand a bit more about your journey and where you came from. So tell the listeners a little bit more about your route into the health and fitness industry.
Yeah, I think I started very similar way to a lot of people in the industry, in that it was through my own health experience. So I used to be overweight as a child and a teenager. And at some point in my life, that just didn't want that anymore. So I think I was about 14, 15. I started reading about nutrition, reading about exercise training, and started putting it into practice. And I kind of realized, wow, you can do a lot to your body by changing your food and your exercise, crazily enough. I started to lose weight. That was fantastic. I thought about going into nutrition originally when I was going to go to uni. My parents talked me out of that because, so this is a conversation from a very, very long time ago, but at that time, nutrition wasn't considered a particularly viable career option. So they kind of convinced me out of that, and they said, just do a general science degree and then you can do whatever you want after that. So I did that, the general science in Cork in Ireland, and I then went traveling and working and kind of got out of the whole science field for a while. But nutrition always stayed with me. It was always something that I absolutely loved, something that I could apply on a daily basis, loved learning about it, loved reading about it, and applying it. And at one point I just said, okay, look, I love this so much. I love talking about it. I love learning it. I need to make this my career. So I went back and did a master's in human nutrition and metabolism in Barcelona. And I ended up setting up my business over there, Be More Nutrition, and working as a coach for a while. And then I got to the point where I was like, I love working as a coach, but I still love the science side of things. So I just want to do more about that. And I decided to do a PhD. And I was very lucky because I found a PhD that looked like it was tailor-made for me in Liverpool John Moores University. And that's what I'm doing now. And I'm researching high protein diets and Mediterranean diets and resistance exercise and its effects on muscle loss in people with heart conditions. So it's a load of different aspects of nutrition and fitness, all combined into something that I really hope will have a meaningful effect on people once we get some results.
Sure. I mean, it's so interesting. I guess two things there. First of all, the area of research is something that we all are going to experience at some point. At the end of the day, we're all going to age. We're all going to experience muscle loss. And so I think it's not only a very pertinent area of research, probably pretty important, especially as we know global populations are increasing. And so it's definitely, I think, a very important area of work. And I guess the second thing as well is it's amazing how many people, like you say, almost get into the industry as a secondary thing. Like it wasn't maybe the primary focus initially. Like certainly my degree was accounting and finance, and a lot of people you speak to are kind of, it's literally either nothing related or it was very, very general initially. Like I know my wife, she was like psychology and pharmacology, and of course psychology has some way of a relation to how we, definite relation to how we coach people. That is so funny how many people you speak to. I would almost say it's more than half of the people I speak to, they were not really, it wasn't like, I wanted to be a personal trainer, I wanted to be a nutrition coach, that's what I was going to do, that was my career. It always kind of comes as like you say, through a passion or a struggle or a bit of both?
Absolutely.
So
And I think it's because people are looking for something that they're passionate about, because, you know, look, it's as cliche as it sounds, like, you know, when you do something that you love and that you're passionate about, it doesn't feel like a job. And that's important for people. Like, you know, if you're going in and sitting in an office every day and doing something that you hate, you know, who wants to do that? Like, although a lot of people do.
I certainly didn't, and so here we are. So I just wanted to touch on, I won't touch on too much. So I know you were at Mac Nutrition before, and of course you left there to go and do your degree at Liverpool John Moores University. So what kind of made you really want to pursue this PhD specifically, and what was the biggest lesson or takeaway that you've kind of taken from your research so far? So it's a bit of a double-barreled question there.
So I wanted to do the PhD because I realized that research was something that I'm very, very interested in, and I want to get into academia. So working in universities in a research capacity and in a teaching capacity as well. And I suppose I was looking for PhDs, and I didn't want to do just any old PhD. I wanted to do something that I was really, really passionate about. And when I was looking around, like I said earlier, it almost appeared that this PhD was made for me. It's just because I read the title, and the title is catchy. Let me tell you, if I can remember, it was like high protein Mediterranean diets and resistance exercise for the amelioration of sarcopenic obesity in cardiac rehab patients, which literally rolls off the tongue.
Say that 5 times fast.
We have since shortened the title of what we're doing, made it a little bit more user friendly. But
nice.
Basically, it was incorporating a lot of different aspects of things that I'm really, really passionate about in nutrition. So and fitness. So one, it had the resistance exercise aspect, which, you know, it's something that I do myself. I'm not a coach myself, like from the, you know, I'm not a PT. But it's something that I've used all my life, and I recommend to all of my clients to do as well, just because I think that on top of nutrition is really important. It had high protein diets, which I'm very, very interested in, just from my own, like, you know, body composition goals. Mediterranean diets, and that was a major aspect of my master's degree in Barcelona. I often say that we were kind of brainwashed over there to love the Mediterranean diet. But there's just a huge amount of research into the benefits of that kind of eating pattern. So I said, hey, it's fantastic. That's got that as well. And then it was dealing with a couple of issues that I think are hugely important on a population level. So one of those is heart disease. We know it's like coronary heart disease, the #1 killer of people worldwide. So it's a major issue. And then we were talking about muscle loss. And sarcopenia is something that not a lot of people are aware of, but it is a major issue that most people are going to have to deal with at some point. I just thought, it's all of these different things coming together. I'm passionate about all these. I want to kind of study these more and learn more about them, and maybe kind of learn how to help treat them a bit. So that's kind of how I got into that specific one.
Well, that segues absolutely splendidly to the next question, which is, let's get on to sarcopenia. Let's talk about what it is. Give the listeners a bit of a brief overview for those that don't know what sarcopenia is, and why we should not only be aware of it, but why we should really be paying attention to it as well.
Sure. So put simply, sarcopenia is the loss of muscle mass that happens naturally as we age. So I always say to people, if you think of older people, we often say that they almost wither and shrink a little bit as they get older. And that is literally, you know, that's a perfect example of looking at muscle loss, sarcopenia. And you know, people think, oh, it's just a little bit of muscle loss, it's not a major issue. And the problem is that sarcopenia is associated with a huge amount of other conditions. So I'm writing a paper on it at the moment, so I should be able to kind of to name these off pretty easily. But so if somebody has sarcopenia or a reduced amount of muscle mass, they're at a higher risk of heart disease, like we spoke about earlier. They're at a higher risk of diabetes. And one of the reasons for that is, if you think about it, muscle is one of the major glucose dumps in the body. So it really helps to regulate plasma levels of glucose. You're at a higher risk of osteoporosis. And that's because basically our muscles are what tug on our bones and interact with our bones to tell our bones that they need to to be strong and rebuild. So if they don't have that stimulus from your muscles, they're going to be weaker. That puts you at a higher risk of fractures. And if you have a fracture when you're older, your chances of dying within the year are increased incredibly. You have a higher risk of poor quality of life. And people ask, what does that have to do with quality of life? If you can't carry your groceries home yourself, or if you can't walk up a stairs yourself, or just do, your regular daily activities, that's a major effect on your quality of life. And then leading from that, it's linked to cognitive decline and depression. Because if you can't go out and see your friends and be as active as you want to be, it's going to affect you mentally as well. And then it has a major effect on mortality. So people with lower muscle mass have a greater chance of dying. So it's not a good thing by any means.
Awesome. And I want to do a bit of a non-planned question. I always like to chuck these little curveballs in there when I can. So we're obviously looking at then, okay, sarcopenia is definitely something we need to look at. And it was interesting you mentioned how you were interested in high protein intakes and high protein diets. And I'm sure you're very aware of the recent stuff that, is it Dr. Jose Antonio that's working on this? I know the ISSN is certainly working on, they were talking about this protein overfeeding study, like upward of like 4.2, 4.4.
Yeah, that was Jose Antonio's, yeah.
That was Jose Antonio, yeah. I can never remember. I always either say him or Kevin Hall. I always kind of mix the two up for some reason. But they both do a lot of research in protein and energy anyway. So as far as sarcopenia is concerned specifically, if you're looking at some of the key factors that we should be looking to offset sarcopenia, what would be maybe the 2 to 3 main things that, certainly the aging population should be looking at?
Okay, so there's a few different factors, and I think it's really, just before I go into that, it might be worth saying what causes it in the first place. And that would be, so we know that the main, or one of the primary drivers of sarcopenia is lack of activity or inactivity. So basically, as we get older, we do less. It's normal, like you hear about, like people, once they retire, their activity levels drop completely. Anytime we move, that's a stimulus on our muscle. And that stimulus is what we need to maintain it. So muscle does, yourself, Ross, it is hard to build muscle. Okay. You don't just walk into a gym, do a few bicep curls and suddenly you're jacked. That doesn't happen. You need to be constantly doing this progressively over years and years and years. Your muscles need to be stimulated to grow. And if they don't have that stimulus, they're not going to grow, or they're not going to maintain, so they can get smaller. So lack of activity is a huge one. Another one is, a thing called anabolic resistance. So when we are older, our body doesn't react to the normal stimulus that we have for growth. So those major stimulus would be exercise, like I just mentioned, and then protein. So like, for example, when we get older, our ability to digest protein isn't as good. We also hold on to amino acids in a different way and use them differently when we're older, for just more repair of our systems as we get older. So that means we need higher doses of protein. We have a reduction in hormones. Like, so with men, from your 30s, your testosterone is going down at a rate of like maybe 1% plus a year. In women, when they go to menopause, there's a sudden drop in progesterone and estrogen, which are, estrogen is a major anabolic hormone in women. So they lose that. And then there's increases in inflammation, increases in oxidative stress that happens just as we get older. So if we kind of take from there, what can we do what can we do to stop sarcopenia? My main one, and like people always think it's kind of strange that I talk about this one first because I'm a nutritionist, is exercise. Without a shadow of a doubt, maintaining exercise, and particularly resistance exercise, is going to be the main way for holding onto muscle as somebody gets older. If you don't do anything else, if you don't take any supplements, if you don't hop on the testosterone, just, doing resistance exercise regularly is going to help maintain muscle mass. And then, hopefully if you're doing it well enough, even build some muscle mass in older people as well. So that would be like my main go-to. And then if besides that, higher protein intakes are really, really beneficial as well. So people often ask, how much protein do you need? And I actually posted something like about this on my own Instagram this week. But looking at studies, it seems that really, really high doses of protein are necessary to stimulate muscle growth. after exercise in older people. So for, let's say for a young person who's doing exercise, if you give them 20 grams of protein, that might be enough to maximally stimulate their muscle growth or muscle protein synthesis. That's fine in a young person, but in an older person, that same dose of protein just doesn't stimulate them as much. So what they need is, they might need actually nearly twice as much, or maybe even more than twice as much protein. So that's like 40 grams of protein to stimulate muscle growth. And when you think about it, like, you know, for yourself and myself, 40 grams of protein, no problem. We're used to eating that much protein all the time. It's like, you know, like you could probably go to your fridge right now and you probably got something in there. You can literally just take it out and eat it. It's like, I've downed 40 grams of protein. But for a lot of older people, it's just not normal to have that much protein in their diet. And we don't think about it, but like, I was looking at the numbers, and protein intakes in the UK can be as low as like 60 grams of protein a day for older people. And then if you look at the distribution there, they've got like, you know, breakfast might only have 12 grams of protein in there total, and it's all skewed towards dinner. So they're not used to eating high protein diets. So you've got to work around that, and you've got to think, like, what can I do? You know, it might not be easy to say to them, look, hey, just get like a massive chicken breast. Because like for like older people, remember, their appetite goes down as well. Protein it's the most satiating macronutrient. So they're not necessarily going to be able to, you know, they might just not be able to finish all that protein. So you have to think of ways around it. And one thing that we're doing in our own research is we're going to be using high protein yogurts, because it's something that older people are familiar with. Everybody's eating the yogurt, and it's probably a little bit more realistic than asking them to, you know, to grab a shake. And because, you know, if you give a protein shake to an older person, they're like, what, you want me to eat this powder? Like, you know, it's just probably not feasible. So if we go with the yogurts, it's recognizable, it's relatively tasty, and it's also really, really high quality protein, because obviously they're made with milk. So, and that's something that they can easily add on top of their diet at the moment. So getting that extra protein in is good. So those would be my two first go-tos. There's a couple of other things that like we can talk about if you want to at some point as well.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure once we get into past the next question, we definitely dive into some of that stuff. I think that just to summarize, I think that probably a lot of people get a bit mixed up on, and whether you're just Gen Pop, aging Gen Pop, whatever it is as well. We need to remember that, like you said, muscle building or muscle retention in general is a signaling dependent process, right? And I think a lot of people often get mixed up between, you know, well, what about losing fat and building muscle? And they almost kind of lump it all together as this one thing. But the reality is, like you said, when it comes to losing body fat, losing weight, it's very much an energy dependent process, right? And so that can be very confused very quickly. And it doesn't mean that, for example, you know, all the things you do, like lifting resistance training, it obviously requires energy, it expends energy and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's such a key thing for people to get to try and think about as they age, is that what are the things that are going to affect that signaling process? Yes, protein intake, that gets impaired as well. Exercise. And like you said as well, you might not be able to train as frequently as us young whippersnappers are able to do those 4 or 5 lifting sessions, having that frequency across a week. For them, they might need to recover like bloody 2, 3, 4 days between sessions, right? So they just have to stimulate as much as they can. And then of course there's sleep, stress, a big factor that, like you mentioned about the yogurt, to be more realistic. I think a big part of it as well is, yes, satiety is, they're much more easily satiated, but then there's digestion as well. We know how people are when they age with their digestion, and you imagine trying to tell them to sit, right, you're going to sit and eat 150 grams of chicken breast, and they're just like, I'll be backed up for days if you give me that. No way. So yeah, like you said, I think there's so many practicalities as far as how to make that feasible for people to try and at least get what's practical and optimal, and try and find a marriage between those two things.
Yeah, and that's the important thing. Like, and you know, you said it there, Ross. Like it's you need to be able to kind of find what works for the individual, and you know that as a coach. And like a lot of research, you know, around this, you know, is some of it is just not practical. Like, you know, like I said, you can't tell the general population take protein shakes. You know, they're not going to do it. But if you say, look, you know, have a high protein yogurt, because they're everywhere now. Like you can get your quarks and your cottage cheeses and your skyrs. Right. You can get those everywhere now. And if you just say, have that on top of your breakfast, have one on top of your lunch, have your normal dinner, which is usually higher protein for most people in the UK anyway. It's just easier for them to do. And that's what you want. You want to make
need to start tricking them and just like make like a really tasty chocolate protein shake, and just like, oh, it's just a chocolate milkshake. Just get that down you, it's dessert.
And that's the key to good coaching, lying.
Oh man, like you just imagine our parents are going to be thinking, we're not going to let those bastards touch our food. They're going to trick us. So one thing that we spoke about when we were kind of getting in touch about setting up this podcast initially was obviously sarcopenia is much broader than a lot of people think as far as a subject matter. And one of the terms that I was really interested to dive into a little bit more was this area of sarcopenic obesity. So can you elaborate on what that is specifically, and what should we be aware of from a body composition and a health point of view with regards to that?
Sure. Yeah. So sarcopenia is really, really commonly known, well, relatively commonly known now, but it only got kind of defined as an official disease, I think, in 2017. So quite recently. So we know it's a loss of muscle mass. But one thing that we see quite frequently, or that we observe in older populations, is that you're not just getting a loss in muscle mass as people age, you're also getting an increase in fat mass. Okay, so that's the obesity is obviously an accumulation of excess fat mass, and then you've got sarcopenia, muscle loss. When you combine them together, you've got the incredibly originally titled Sarcopenic Obesity. Basically, it augments, or I should say, it worsens all of the kind of prior symptoms or conditions that are associated with sarcopenia. So I mentioned that, you know, diabetes and heart disease are associated with sarcopenia. They're actually even more greatly associated with sarcopenic obesity. So the two of them together, they put you at greater risk. And what happens is when an older person is becoming less active, if they're not changing their eating habits, what's going to happen is they'll lose muscle gradually. And that, like, I'm using this very cautiously, this term, but that muscle kind of gets replaced with fat. As in, if they maintain body weight, they're losing muscle, their weight is staying the same, so their proportion of fat mass is increasing. And we know that one of the problems is that as we get older, we have a tendency to store fat in what we call ectopic regions. And what we mean by an ectopic region is a region that is not traditionally an area for storing fat. So if we think about storing fat, we think of like fat under the skin, which is we call subcutaneous fat. In women, it tends to be around their bum and their thighs, whereas in men, it's often around their chest or around their stomach. Exactly.
Yeah.
And we know that especially around the stomach, that can be a metabolic problem. We talk about that a little bit later too. But we also have other areas in the body where it can be stored, and that's around your organs, which is one ectopic or non-standard reason, a place to store your fat. But it can also be stored within muscles as well, and within organs too. So we know that you can get accumulation of fat within the liver, you know, within the pancreas, not just around it. Fat stored within the skeletal muscles as well. And the problem with that is we know that type of fat is metabolically active, or better said, it's active as an endocrine organ. So it kind of has a hormonal function. And we know that it puts out a lot of inflammatory substances and inflammatory cytokines into the blood. The problem with that is when you've got an increase in all of those inflammatory cytokines, you get an increase in something called chronic inflammation. And it's something that people use a lot. It's a word people use a lot, unfortunately, without knowing anything about what it means. Yeah. But we do know that chronic low-level inflammation, when we've got these kind of higher background levels of inflammatory compounds, things like, you know, there's loads of different names, IL-6, tumor necrosis factor, just inflammation in general. When those levels are higher, it puts you at a greater risk of disease in a lot of different ways. So like all the conditions that I mentioned are associated with those inflammatory markers. But on top of that, you've got the added issue that those higher levels of inflammation, if you remember from earlier, I said that inflammation is involved in muscle loss. So the problem is you've got that increase in fat mass, which is causing an increase in inflammation, which is actually making it harder for somebody to maintain muscle. So you've got this vicious cycle where people are they're gaining fat, they're losing muscle. When you lose muscle, exercise is not as easy to do. Okay, when you lose muscle, it's harder to rebuild muscle, because you start losing muscle actually as a way to become anabolic resistant as well. So it's harder to build muscle. So you've got this cycle of inactivity, fat gain, you know, inflammation, muscle loss, and so on and so forth. And it is really, really a vicious cycle that happens so regularly amongst so many older people. And that's why sarcopenia and sarcopenic obesity are such an issue within society today.
Very cool. Good. There's probably quite a lot you could even unpack even further there and dive into all sorts of different things. One thing again, it's a bit of an aside. With the current climate we're in at the moment, with the COVID situation, I almost feel like I don't even want to talk about COVID anymore. I think everyone's just a bit fed up with it. There's obviously this idea that there's a huge cardio risk component to it, but also that it's not just to do with necessarily just the heart itself, but they're talking about apparently I don't know if you've came across this as well. It was just literally Mal and I were talking about it this morning, that there seems to be an aspect of it whereby it can start affecting you in the blood as well. It's to do with the plaque, and it's to do with increasing cardio risk factors from within the blood as well. Is that something that you've came across recently as well? And
so funnily enough, I'm writing a paper on the effects of COVID lockdown on sarcopenic obesity right now, and we're talking about a lot of those different factors that can contribute to the development of other conditions, so like heart disease and like diabetes as well. I haven't looked at anything specifically focusing on the virus, the effects of the virus itself, other than looking at the fact that it does seem to have some kind of, let's say, added effects, or kind of like it's more serious basically in people with cardiovascular disease and diabetes. As to the mechanism, I haven't looked into it much myself, unfortunately. I've looked into it in obesity, but yeah, it's a problem for people who have those comorbidities, diabetes, heart disease, anything like that.
Definitely. So moving on to, I suppose, the final sarcopenia related question. So we've kind of established that resistance exercise, or actually for just the older population, just anything that's going to stimulate muscle tissue is huge. So we know that. We know that higher than quote unquote normal, and bear in mind that most general populations don't even have a normal protein intake. So we're talking about higher than normal, if it were to be established at a good baseline, protein intakes for the older population as well, that's practical within their means, is important. What would be maybe some of the other practical strategies that these older populations could implement in order to offset or at least manage the effects of sarcopenia?
Okay, so I think once we get away from the two main players, exercise and protein, there's a few supplementary strategies that people can consider. So we'll take them in order. So I'm not a huge fan of supplements. I use them regularly, but there's only a few that I would actually recommend to people. And luckily, the ones here that I'm talking about are ones that I kind of recommend regularly. So one is leucine. Okay, it's an amino acid. And the reason I'd recommend it is because, so to stimulate muscle growth, one of the main determinants of how well a protein stimulates muscle growth is how much leucine it has within it, because leucine is, let's say, the trigger for stimulating muscle growth. So if you get enough leucine in a meal, along with other amino acids, it can stimulate muscle protein synthesis and growth. So adding about 2.5 grams to 3 grams of leucine to a normal meal that has like maybe 20 grams of high quality protein, that can actually stimulate muscle protein synthesis almost fully in older people. So there's quite a few studies that have looked at the effects of that. So that's one good thing for people to look at, is potentially using leucine. And that would mean that they don't need to eat a full 40 grams of protein. They can probably get by with a little less protein and just kind of adding in a little bit of leucine to stimulate it more. So that's one option. Another one is vitamin D. So we know that vitamin D has a major effect on muscle mass, and it may contribute to muscle loss as we get older, because we also know that vitamin D levels in older people tend to decline as well. So that would be one potential option. With that, you'd be talking about, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day. That can help potentially. And it also has a major impact on insulin sensitivity. And we know that older people who are more insulin sensitive are also more likely to be able to stimulate muscle growth as well, because insulin sensitivity is hugely important for muscle anabolism. Then one of the big ones that I actually just finished writing a couple of paragraphs on this last night is omega-3 fatty acids. and specifically the long chain fatty acids. And interestingly, high doses of omega-3s have been shown to have a really, really beneficial effect on the muscle protein synthesis response. And that it doesn't necessarily mean that people taking omega-3s is going to stimulate muscle protein synthesis more than normal. But what it might mean is that taking those taking those fatty acids will help you to overcome some of the anabolic resistance that older people experience. So they may not need to eat that full 40 grams. Might be able to eat a little bit less. As for numbers on that, we don't know, how much protein, how much of an effect it will have on protein intake. But what we do know is that it can help to improve muscle mass in older people, more so than in groups that don't take it. The one thing I say is a lot of the trials that have been really beneficial, showing the effects of omega-3s, have been using a commercial omega-3 preparation called, I think it's Lovasa. I could be butchering that right now, but basically it's a very, very high strength, I think it's prescription only, omega-3 preparation. And it's so that's a 4-gram preparation, and that contains a little over 3.2 grams of combined EPA and DHA. Okay, so that is a very, very high strength. So if you think of it like, most of the commercial fish oils that you buy, if you take, 1 gram capsule, that's a big capsule, by the way. If you take 1 gram capsule, you'll be lucky if, half of that is EPA and DHA. Okay, so this Lovasa, it's purified, it's concentrated. It's a very, very high dose. So whenever I recommend omega-3s anyway, especially for older people, I always go high dose. And it does seem that you need those high doses for any effects. Like, people talk about its effects on heart disease. And there've been trials that have shown that, omega-3s have no effect, but that's because the dosage is too low. If you start getting into that 4-gram dosage area, like 4,000 milligrams, that's when the magic starts to happen, so to speak. So that's one other option. And then besides that, I'm thinking the only other supplement that I recommend is creatine. And so creatine is something everybody has heard of. People often don't think about using it for older people. But with older people, what we get alongside sarcopenia, and it's potentially more serious than sarcopenia itself, is something called dynapenia. And dynapenia is actually the age-associated loss of muscle strength and power and function. Okay, so sarcopenia, we're talking almost exclusively about muscle mass, but dynapenia specifically talks about strength. And that's when people, have issues with functionality and being able to move and being able to save themselves if they fall, or to get off the ground if they fall down. They need that strength. And creatine, we know, has a direct effect on increasing muscle power output and being able to perform explosive movements. And that's why one of the reasons it may be beneficial for older people for improving function. It also can potentially benefit their training. So if you're taking creatine, it'll make you more efficient at training. You'll be able to get that stimulus onto your muscles more, cause a little bit of growth, a little bit of strength increase. So that's where creatine can be beneficial. And that would be your standard 5-gram dose a day of creatine, and just maintain at that. And it also has the added benefit of, improving cognitive function, which is something a lot of people don't talk about in older adults, but it's a major player for improving cognitive function. Although I take creatine and I'm dumb AF, so I don't know. It's just, I'm a non-responder when it comes to the cognitive benefits. But so yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, I think I was kind of hoping there was going to be some supplements you were going to kind of touch on in there, and I'm super glad you did, and you pretty much touched on all the ones that we kind of seem to know from the research seems to be most clear at the moment. And I'm sure there'll be other things that we maybe dive into over time that we're maybe not quite aware of yet, or maybe are just not quite as prominent. But speaking on creatine specifically, it's amazing how many benefits it has that are completely unspoken of. Because if you think, let's be honest, we think creatine, we think guys in the gym getting freaking jacked. No one really thinks of creatine in any other way but that. And then people worry about water retention and so on and so forth. But like you said, because if you think about what strength and power is, it's a very neurologically driven process, right? And so those neurodegenerative conditions that a lot of these older people experience, when we start looking outside the box of just the one lens that people tend to view everything through, it's all of a sudden, that actually makes a lot of sense why that would be beneficial to that particular population. So I'm really glad you touched on that. So just to wrap up, one of the last questions I would have is, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, wow, like I didn't really know much about sarcopenia or about sarcopenic obesity or just about the topic in general, and I'd quite like to learn a bit more about it. What are some great resources the listeners could go and check out to learn more and understand the subject of sarcopenia, apart from your social media profile, which has a lot of great stuff on there?
Oh man, that was what I was going to say, like plug myself. No, there are a few really, really good researchers out there and a couple of really, really good research groups. So online, there's not a huge amount of stuff in the Gen Pop area when it comes to sarcopenia, unfortunately. Just before I mention the researchers, I will mention, so Austin Baraki, who is, he's a coach with Barbell Medicine, and he's an MD, but he's also done a presentation on sarcopenia, and he talks about it relatively regularly. But if you go and you do a YouTube search for Austin Baraki and sarcopenia, one of his presentations will come up, and that's a really, really good place if people want to start and have some kind of visual cues as well as to what sarcopenia is. So that's one place to look. And then besides that, there are a couple of groups that I think are really, really doing a lot of great work when it comes to sarcopenia. So one of those would be the research group of Stuart Phillips, who is based at McMaster University in Canada. They do a huge amount of protein research, but it's not just looking at protein. They look at, resistance exercise and different types of resistance exercise and training volumes in older people. They look at the effects of inactivity on older people. So like they've done some of the studies where like they will literally strap somebody up for, put them in a bed for a week or something like that, just to look at how much muscle they lose. Or they might tell them to reduce their steps down to, 1,000 or 2,000 steps a day, which is all I'm getting right now, thanks to lockdown. And they've shown how quickly people can lose muscle mass, how quickly they reduce their insulin sensitivity, and then how protein can help with that. So Stuart Phillips, really, really worth following, or at least searching on PubMed if you want to look at some of his research and some of the work his group has done. And then the other group that I think is really, really good is the group of a researcher called Luc van Loon, who's based out of Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And they do a lot of similar research to Stuart Phillips. They're the ones that have done the studies where they will actually literally strap someone to a bed, or they will put somebody's leg in a cast for a week, so they can look at how much muscle they lose in that leg compared to the leg that was able to move around. I don't know how they get ethical approval for this stuff, but fair play to him. But Luc van Loon, he puts out a load of really, really cool research. And yeah, if you just search him, you'll just have so many options. And he collaborates with Stuart Phillips quite often on papers as well. So you can, if you find a paper with their names together, it's going to be really, really good quality.
Nice. I think that's plenty for people to go and dig into initially, for those that want to geek out on this stuff. So we move on to, before we literally wrap up, the quick fire round. So this is always, that's the look I get from everyone. Everyone's always like, I'm a bit scared. I don't know what's going to happen. It's literally just super random, off the wall questions, just for the listeners to get to know you a bit more, and just gotcha. Also for me to just see what you answer on certain things. And we could be.
Is this going to have a major effect on our friendship? I just need to know before.
No comment. No, we should be all right. So I know you're a big lover of your food and of tasty food as well. I think on your social media in particular, you talk about a page for science, research, and food porn, I believe, is on there. So we like a bit of food porn, does Richie? So
I do.
Donuts or brownies?
Brownies, hands down.
Good man. So we can still be friends. That's good.
God.
My wife's like, wrong answer. She's like, wrong answer. She's a donut person.
No, donuts. Fair enough. If you get think of a standard donut. It's all right. If you get a good brownie, man, it's fudgy, it's chocolatey, it's rich, it's heavy, it's everything that a good piece of pastry needs to be, basically.
You're preaching to the choir, but unfortunately Miss Scandinavia over here, they like their savory and she doesn't like sweet stuff that much. So
all right, so she's not. I'm saying this: if she doesn't like sweet stuff, she's not allowed to have an opinion here. Done.
There we go. Agreed. If only it could work on many other things when you're married, but there you go. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Pralines and cream by Haagen-Dazs. Nice combination of caramel. You've got like some praline nuts in there. They got a little bit of crunch, sweet, creamy. It's all good.
I have to say, I mean, it's so plain, but I really like the Haagen-Dazs, the Belgian chocolate.
This is going to sound funny. I've never actually had their plain chocolate ice cream.
So the funny thing is, they don't just have, they have a plain chocolate and they have a Belgian chocolate, and I didn't know this was the case. So there's literally a corner shop down where we live, and they sell the Belgian chocolate, so most people would get. It's got the little flakes of chocolate in it. But they actually have a plain chocolate as well, and it doesn't taste anything like the Belgian chocolate. So for those of you who don't know quite as much about ice cream culture as we do, then there you go. There's a difference.
I may have to run down and get one of those. You know, those little packs of 4 with all of the different flavors.
Exactly.
We can get a Belgian chocolate in there to try it out.
It's one of my favorites. So plain, but you know, sometimes simple is good. What would be your favorite meal out?
Oh man, oh God, that is a horrendous question. There's so many things that I love. Okay, I'm gonna say potentially I love so many different foods. Oh God, you've got me on this. I'm going to say Indian food. I would go out and I would get a nice creamy curry, maybe a garlic and cheese naan or something like that. You know, get some onion bhajis in there. Yeah, that's like I love Indian food so much. But then again, I could also say like you could talk to me about a million other different meals out, and I'd be like, oh, I love that as well. Like, you know, so it's a tough one. Indian is up there. Okay.
There we go. Yeah, we do like Indian food as well. We don't have it often, but we do like it. And then if I'm going to allow you to have a couple more, I would say for us, we love pizza and burgers. Those would be 2 as well.
Yeah, I love a good pizza, man. And yeah, we're lucky. We've got one place right across the road over here. Like, it's a proper Italian place. They've got their own brick oven in there. You know, amazing pizzas, amazing like bases that are just fluffy and crispy on the outside. Yeah, you can tell I like talking about food.
Yeah, I was going to say, for those that are listening to this on one of the podcast platforms, you just get to miss just how passionate and engrossed Richie was getting into the texture of the base of that pizza there. So you'll have to watch the YouTube video to check that out. Worst exercise in the gym, or least favorite exercise in the gym?
Oh, I can tell you that straight away because I've been doing it for the past 10 weeks. The Bulgarian split squat. That exercise can just go off for itself. I
tell you what, between lunges and split squats, they're not very well liked.
Oh my God, man. I'm happy to squat, like put a weight on my back. I'll do it for however many reps, but man, I just doing like Bulgarian split squats, and I'm just like, I hate, like literally from the very start, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. And like, I know it's a great exercise because like I feel good after it. But God, I hate doing it so much.
Let's flip the script. Favorite exercise?
Oh, geez, that's a tough one. I like a lot. Pendulum squat.
Oh, that's a good choice. That's a good choice.
I only did a pendulum squat for the first time. I think it was at some point last year. And I was just blown away by how good the movement felt. It's just like, it's so nice. It's so smooth. It feels so natural. I loved it. I just wish my gym had one. I was at a big like bodybuilder style gym, and I was just trying it out. I loved it.
Was that Watson or an Atlantis one?
No idea.
Yeah, so me being a biomechanics geek, I'm just like, so the one that we have over here is Watson in the gyms that we're in. And then there's one place, and it's a private facility that has it, but the Atlantis pendulum it's got to be one of the, up there with one of the top leg machines you can do.
And like, you know, for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, like just Google it, check it out, and see if you can find a gym nearby. Even if it's not nearby, it's worth traveling to a gym just to try one out there. They're lovely machines.
Yeah, they're a sick piece of kit. If you could only travel to one place post-COVID, what would it be? Where would it be, more to the point?
You know, I'd go back home to the farm, back in Ireland. I haven't seen my parents since Christmas, and I was genuinely a little bit concerned for them over the whole COVID thing. And I just, there was a point there where I said, look, I'm going to come back to the farm just to see, just to be there, because I can help out. I can help my, it'd be handy to have somebody else, helping out my mom with the cooking and stuff like that, or anything else on the farm. But like I said that to my dad, and he said, look, don't, because the first thing you're going to have to do is 2 weeks of quarantine. And he said, we're grand. And to be honest, they're grand. It would be more for me just to kind of be at home and see how they're doing. But like the funny thing is, back on the farm in Ireland, nothing has changed. Like they are literally working as normal, doing everything as normal, because like on the farm, everything is self-contained when you think about it. Like, so the only thing is like they're not going grocery shopping as much. And yeah, so, but yeah, that was the first place that came to mind when you asked that question.
That was a good answer. I like that answer. A bit more of a personal touch. So some people are like, oh, I'd love to go here, I'd love to go there. And you're like, straight home to the fam. It's right there. Appreciate that. God, what was the question I was going to ask? Yeah, so you're obviously someone who runs your own podcast as well. Who's been if you had to choose, who's been your favorite guest to interview so far?
God, man, you're making me choose sides here.
Bad man.
No,
man.
I know who have a bit of an idea. So very early on, I got to speak with Eric Helms, and we got to speak about a paper that he did on, let's say, kind of on the development of eating disorders within the bodybuilding culture. And that was an absolutely fantastic discussion, just because, one, Eric is an incredibly smart guy, very, very well able to answer any questions that I threw at him. And I just loved the conversation. We spoke about so many interesting things about bodybuilding culture, how it can affect people's mentality about food, how it can potentially lead to the development of eating disorders. And I really, really enjoyed that. And then besides that, just to kind of follow on from it or segue from it, about 2 weeks ago, I spoke with Jake Lenarden, who is an eating disorder researcher at Deakin University. And he actually co-authored that same paper with Eric Helms. And so I got to speak with him about it. And it's just, I really, really enjoy speaking about the mentality that goes with diet culture, and even the mentality about like how to help people diet better. And it was great to speak with Jake about how eating disorders develop and what can be done, or what is kind of being researched as a kind of strategies to help people with those. So I really, really enjoyed those two conversations. But man, I've loved so many conversations. Like I've been very, very lucky. I've had some great guests on. So yeah, it's a tough question, but like I do have kind of a particular place in my heart for those two.
Very cool. Yeah, and I've obviously seen your kind of list. If you go through Richie's social media, you'll see he puts like a little poster on there of the guests he's had on his podcast, and it is some very, very good names on there. Like I noticed Eric Helms, obviously Gabrielle Fondaro was another one that was probably really fascinating. She's a very nice individual as well, super smiley and happy. And so yeah, it'd be some of these people that I would like to get on as well. So speaking of that, who should we get on our podcast next?
Who should you get on next? Just because you mentioned him, get Jose Antonio on. He is one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's such a cool guy. And it's probably the most I've laughed doing a podcast ever, because he just doesn't know how to be serious. He's just continuously but like, if you want to talk about protein, he is one of the guys to speak with. So yeah, I'd have a chat with him. And yeah, he's super, super nice, super friendly.
Yeah, I'm sure he's a busy man, but if it comes to talking about protein research, I'm sure he'll be all over it. So we'll definitely reach out and try and get him on for sure. Richie, where is the best place for people to find you?
Unfortunately, as we were speaking earlier, probably on Instagram. You can get me. My account is Be More Nutrition. So that's B_more_nutrition. I'm most active on that, although I haven't been particularly active recently. Trying to put out more content, especially on sarcopenia and muscle loss. I've got a Facebook account for Be More Nutrition. So that's just, if you search for Be More Nutrition, I should pop up. And then I've got a website, which is www.bemorenutrition.com. And I've got some articles, blog posts up there, and I'm trying to get more out in the coming months as well. So it's probably the best way to get me.
Very nice. So we'll link all that in the show notes anyway, just so it's super easy for people to find you, connect with you, check out your website, articles, etc. And yeah, just from my side, Richie, I just want to commend you for being like, and certainly from my point of view, looking at your work and how you kind of present yourself to the fitness community. I always think you do a very just sincere, honest job of presenting really good quality information. So I just want to commend you for that.
Oh, thanks. You did all the buttering up at the start. You don't need to continue with it.
Don't need to keep doing it, right?
Thanks, Ross.
But I think often we're very easy to, especially in a world at the moment, which there's a lot of negativity, and we don't need to touch on exactly the areas that is at the moment. I think it's very important that we all recognize each other for the good that we're all trying to do in the world as well. So I'm trying to make a very distinct effort to make sure I really commend people for how I think they are as people and what I think they're doing to bring value to the world. So no, it's important to do.
And it's hugely appreciated, lad. And you know, it's nice for people to say that, and I think what you said there is important as well, because let's say in this industry, I think, you know, we're here to support each other. You know, a lot of people think that we're all in competition with each other, and I think nothing could be further from the truth. So yeah, that kind of support, you know, from all sides is really important. So thanks very much for that.
Definitely. Thanks again, guys. The best way you can support us, Better Body Radio, is to get on iTunes or whichever your preferred platform is. Leave us a 5-star review. If anything that Richie said in this episode resonated with you whatsoever, drop a comment in there as well into the episode comments section, and that would be the best way you can support us at this time. And of course, as we gain more and more traction and we're able to get more and more good quality information like this from Richie in front of more people, we can ultimately achieve our mission, which is to help as many people achieve evidence-based, good quality, practical information as possible. And no doubt, Richie, we'll be able to have you back on at a later stage to almost get a bit of an update on where your research is at, maybe 6 months down the line, 3 months down the line. That would be absolutely fantastic.
I'd love to. Hopefully I'll have some results.
Thanks again, Richie.
Thanks, mate.